Hey guys, well, the wait is almost over. On April 27th, Avengers Infinity War hits theaters, promising to be the biggest film of the year and perhaps the biggest superhero event of all time, just after the first Avengers back in 2012. It's been a long journey, spanning 10 years, over 18 movies, soon to be 19, and it's all led to this moment where we hopefully get to see the 10 years of setup finally pay off in a satisfying third chapter, until Avengers 4 releases next year. And to celebrate this historical moment, I thought it would be a good idea to count down the 18 films leading up to Avengers Infinity War, and come to the conclusion of what is the best MCU film. Now, I know that many people have their favorites, and my list may not align with your own, but this is how I would personally rank the MCU movies after giving them a rewatch. And as a note, just because I put certain ones at the lower end doesn't mean I think they're bad. In fact, I think all these films are good. Just some are better than others. With all that said, let's get started. Number 18, Iron Man 2. This one was probably a given. How do you follow up the first Iron Man, which proved to be such a great success, both critically and financially? Well, you obviously try to make it bigger and better, and this is where the film fails. Iron Man 2 feels like an unfinished and unpolished movie compared to the first one, which might be in part to the team only having 2 years to work on the film, rather than 3. And because of that, we have a film that has too many ideas and things going on in it. We have the main plot with the antagonist Whiplash, who's trying to take down Tony Stark and have revenge, but we also have a plot dealing with Tony's alcoholism, as well as Avengers setup scenes with Nick Fury to combine it to the larger universe, and all these ideas ultimately end up feeling half-baked. It's still a fun time, with some of the best individual scenes in the entire series. The Speedway scene in particular is a standout, but it doesn't have the polish or freshness of the first film, and in the end, it's just kind of disappointing. Number 17, Thor. Thor was probably the easiest film to do badly. It's a very different concept compared to most other superhero films, but director Kenneth Branagh manages to make a film that does what it can to bring Thor into the MCU and make Loki a good villain, since he was set to be the villain in Avengers, and this would be his origin story. The film overall is a cheesy ride, and the scenes in Asgard are visually breathtaking to look at. But the film falters when the plot on Earth gets in the way of the interesting political intrigue on Asgard. I had a lot of fun with the Asgard scenes, as you can tell. It's an alright film with some cool action and an interesting villain, and a charismatic performance from Chris Hemsworth, who more or less plays an uninteresting hero. It's fine, but nothing memorable. Number 16, The Incredible Hulk. The Incredible Hulk is incredibly underrated, and the only reason it's this low is because there are so many more films that are so much better. But I find that this one often gets pushed under the rug when people discuss the MCU. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it is filled with really great performances. I think Edward Norton does a terrific job as Bruce Banner. I also would say I prefer him over Mark Ruffalo. His Banner feels very much like a callback to Bill Bixby, and I like the idea of this small, scrawny guy becoming this big, hulking monster. It's sad that there seems to be no farther plans to continue this series, seeing as the film leaves off with some hints to future films and future villains, including the leader. I fear that this film will get forgotten among the other MCU films, but I still think it should be checked out. Number 15, Thor Ragnarok. Yes, I'm aware that this is an unpopular opinion. First off, let me say that the film is a lot of fun. I love the visual style, the 80s soundtrack, and the lighthearted edge to the film. But there's points on rewatch where I don't know what the film is trying to be. This film can be very funny at times, but it has a severe problem with how they use the comedy. The first act is probably the biggest offender of this, in which we get shake-wake jokes and forced inserted comedy, which feels added in last minute, and most of it isn't funny. Don't get me wrong, some parts are legitimately funny, but others feel out of place as well as immature. This film is over 2 hours long, and originally it was 100 minutes. Before they went back and added more comedy. I feel this was a big mistake. Not just that, but the tone itself is off at some points. The scenes with Hela, for the most part, are much darker in tone and feel awkward once you cut it with funny antics with Thor and Hulk. The Hela scenes ultimately feel like a carryover from the original darker direction the sequel was going to take, before it became an 80s themed buddy comedy. The film is still really fun, but it seems to have a bit of an identity crisis, as it tries hard to not just be another Thor film. Number 14, Thor: The Dark World. I know. How can I possibly put this above Thor Ragnarok? In fact, how can I put this that high on the list? Well, hear me out. I never saw the movie when it came out. I had no desire to ever watch it. It wasn't until I was preparing for this video that I finally got around to watching it, and I have to say, I had a lot of fun with this one, just like Thor Ragnarok. But what puts this one above it is the fact that the film remains consistent in its tone. It's a goofy cosmic adventure, and what I wish the first Thor movie had been. My favorite stuff from the first Thor was all the stuff to do with Asgard and the other realms, and this film delivers on that. I can understand why this film might not be for everyone, but I found its bizarre and goofy magical nonsense engaging, and the Earth scenes didn't bother me as much this time around. The one problem I would say I have is a problem that everyone brings up, and that is the villain, who is just weak and completely uninteresting. The film has a lot of melodramatic scenes and a lot of Lord of the Rings style action and fun that I can't help but enjoy the film. It's a good time. Number 13, Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange is probably the one MCU movie I would probably revisit the least. Now, how can I say that if it's that far up the list? Well, the film just didn't leave much of an impression on me, and feels more like just another superhero film. That's not to say it's not good. The film starts off strong, with terrific performances from Benedict Cumberbatch and others, but slowly moves into the territory of just being another MCU film. The film borrows heavily from Iron Man in structure of the plot, as well as the main character's story of turning into a better person. It just doesn't feel as fresh as it could be. But as stated before, Cumberbatch makes the character relatable, and his performance is by far the strong point and the heart of the film. The special effects are dazzling, and the third act is a real treat, but it can't help the film from feeling so familiar, since it is so similar to the first Iron Man. I still liked it quite a bit. It had some fun moments and interesting ideas, but overall, nothing groundbreaking. Number 12, Iron Man. It's the film that started it all, and often considered one of the best the MCU has to offer, and honestly, I find it a bit overrated. It's definitely a solid film, with good writing, good acting, good pacing and editing. But maybe it's just me looking back at it after seeing 17 more films after, but it's just good. Robert Downey Jr. is his best in the film, in the portrayal of the character, but I find it's like Doctor Strange. The most interesting part of the film is the first 45 minutes, and then I feel like it never reaches that height again. It never wowed me like everyone else. This is a hard choice because there's a lot I like about the film, but it feels primitive compared to what I have now. And maybe that's because I'm used to the MCU films we have now. But I've always felt this way about the film. It's far better than its sequel, but I would never put this in the top 5. Maybe I'll do an individual review on Iron Man sometime and try to figure out what I feel is missing from the film. But as for now, this is where it stands. Number 11. Spider-Man Homecoming. After many years, Spider-Man finally comes home to Marvel through a deal with Sony and gives us a fun, lighthearted film that reminds me why I love the character Spider-Man so much. Tom Holland gives another terrific performance as Peter Parker / Spider-Man, and it feels so small in scale compared to the other MCU films. It also gives us one of the best villains the MCU has had for a while, in Michael Keaton as the Vulture, who steals the show with quite possibly the best scene in the film. The film isn't without its faults, though. The best friend character on rewatch got rather annoying, but other times I got some legitimate laughs from him, because I was able to put myself in his shoes and see how I would react to having a superpowered best friend. It was a nice surprise, and I can't wait for its sequel to start out Phase 4 with. Number 10. Guardians of the Galaxy. When I first saw Guardians back in 2014, I did not get the hype around it. So much so that I left the film unfulfilled. I was promised a game-changing superhero film, but what I got was just a film that I thought was okay and fun. I was just very let down by it, so for several years I never revisited it. Until recently. And now that the hype has died down for it, I was able to finally take a second look, and I found myself enjoying it a lot more than I originally did. It's still nowhere close to the best MCU movie in my opinion, but I could see myself putting this in to watch it every now and then if I just wanted to watch a fun film. It feels like a comic book nerd's wet dream. The screen oozes with bright, colorful worlds and characters, and has a sense of fun that was far different than what the other movies were doing at the time. So looking back now, I can maybe see what drew people to it in the first place. But I think it's nowhere close to the masterpiece some claim it to be. It's just a really fun film, with some fun characters, great music, and a world that I wouldn't mind revisiting again. Number 9. Avengers Age of Ultron. Now, I've seen people who absolutely despise this movie, say it sucks and isn't as good as the first one. And I'll agree with you in that last part, but this is far from a bad movie, and honestly, I have more fun with it the more I see it. Does it have problems? Oh yeah. The pacing can be a problem sometimes, especially in the first half, and it takes a while for the film to get going, unlike the first film, which blazes through like a well-oiled machine. The film, like Iron Man 2, also has a problem of including too many things to set up for future films. They feel out of place and distracting, but they're not around that long. Does that make it bad, though? I don't think so. In fact, there are parts of Age of Ultron that I think exceed the first in a few areas. For one, I think what I admire about this film is how it does take its time with things. It is slower in pace, and yet it can be a drag perhaps for some, but it leads to some very good moments that we might not have gotten if the film was a faster-paced film. I loved the very Whedon-heavy scenes of just the group drinking and trying to lift Thor's hammer. It shows them more as everyday people than just our superheroes. It leads to more character development, which always is a plus in my book. It may not be as good as the original, but it's still fun. It's something different than what we got in the first one, and that's great. I don't want it to be the first one. I just hope that it will be looked back on more kindly with time. Number 8. Ant-Man. Ant-Man was the first movie to come out after Age of Ultron, and for those who felt that the movie was too bloated, were introduced to just a fun little heist movie. This was probably for the best after Age of Ultron. Ant-Man also has an interesting feel to it, unlike any of the other Phase 2 films. And if you look back at all three phases, you might be able to tell that each phase feels very different from the others. And Ant-Man feels like a Phase 1 movie, honestly. It's difficult to explain, but all the films put under the Paramount and Universal banner have a feel that the others don't have. That said, the film is very sharp and funny, being written by Edgar Wright, aside from some rewrites. It also has the most relatable protagonist of the MCU. Scott Lang is a great character, and Paul Rudd portrays him wonderfully. On top of that, the film has a great supporting cast, like Michael Douglas, who surprisingly gives a lot of heart, and that's the film's biggest strength, is it has a lot of heart, and it makes it one of the best, in my opinion. Number 7. Captain America, the First Avenger. There's something really special I feel when I watch the first Captain America. I often feel like I'm watching an old adventure film, which is probably due to the film being a period film, which is something I love. Captain America makes the great choice of setting itself in World War II and allows for a whimsical, fun, and adventurous watch. Joe Johnston, who directed the film, is no stranger to this type of film. His film, The Rocketeer, shares many parallels to it. I love this film, and how it takes cliches, and instead of them feeling tired, they feel just right. You have the character that goes from zero to hero, a man who can do no wrong, and a villain that just wants to do nothing but rule the world. The film has a sentimentality to it that the other films don't have, and a real sense of pride. Chris Evans is a fantastic actor, and I think out of the 3 Captain America movies, this is his best performance by far. I love rooting for him every time I see it, and the scenes between him and Stanley Tucci are so heartwarming. I have no problems saying this is the best pre-Avengers film. It's one of the best of the MCU in general, with brilliant directing, fantastic acting, and a rocking good tale that leads straight into Avengers. Number 6. Marvel's The Avengers. How does the first Avengers hold up nearly 6 years later? Better than ever. It was a fun film then, and it's a fun film now. And what's most surprising about it is that it actually works. Every character gets an equal amount of screen time, with plenty of them to do. And Joss Whedon does a great job of giving us strange combinations we never knew we wanted. Such as the bromance between Tony Stark and Bruce Banner, or the full-on fan service that is the great fight between Thor and Iron Man. It's got such a great boost of energy to it, with likable characters and fun action, that it more or less just makes for a fun movie and isn't bogged down by any world building. It's often considered one of the best superhero films ever made, and I would agree with that statement. It's a great film, and one I could find myself watching over and over. Number 5. Iron Man 3. Iron Man 3 has always been a divisive film among MCU crowd, and many of its complaints are directed towards the villain reveal in the third act. Some felt it was a slap in the face to fans, others just plain disappointing, and then there were those, like me, that just didn't care. That said, of course I think Iron Man 3 is the best of the Iron Man trilogy, being the best written and structured of the 3. It brings back the fast pace of the first one, while improving from the second one, this time really giving Tony Stark a dilemma and making it play a major role into the story as he suffers from PTSD after the first Avengers. It's filled with great performances and some good action, and works perfectly as a third and possibly final entry in the Iron Man series, and is a great swan song for Robert Downey Jr., even though this would not be his last film playing the snarky playboy. Number 4. Black Panther. Black Panther is an epic through and through, and is one of the best entries to come out of the MCU. The scale is so massive in this one that it feels like I'm watching a Sword and Sandals epic at points. It also gives us one of the best and complex villains that we've had in the MCU. Michael B. Jordan's Killmonger is perfect and truly elevates the film with his presence. Being so new and fresh in my mind, it might be crazy putting it this high. Trust me, at one point, this was at number 2. And when it comes to rewatches down the road, this may drop or stay where it is. That said, this was a fun ride with much more to chew on than most other MCU films. If you want to hear more what I have to say with the film, check out my review on my channel to see what else I gotta say about it. Number 3. Captain America: The Winter Soldier. The Winter Soldier is like a spy thriller from the 1970s, and with a great sense of suspense and mystery, the film includes some of the best set pieces and action the MCU has seen. This was the Russo brothers' first superhero film, and it is perhaps their purest of the three because it is so simplistic compared to Civil War and what Infinity War looks to be. It's a perfect sequel and a great follow-up to the original, expanding the film to make one of the more memorable superhero entries in the MCU. Chris Evans continues to shine with so much charisma and energy for the character. However, it's not as good compared to the sequel that would come out 2 years later. Still, it's an incredible movie with all the action, humor, and drama a Captain America movie needs. Number 2. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Alright, I know to many people, Guardians 1 is one of their favorite MCU movies, and sometimes they may even consider it the best superhero movie of all time. But many of them don't share the same love for Volume 2. Then there are others like myself who liked the first film for what it was, but never was too impressed by it at first viewing. I did not have a problem at all loving this film though. Coming from someone that didn't love the first film, this one delivers with a more focused story on Peter Quill that even though it takes up the majority of the film, it's fine because he is the main character. I've also heard other complaints that the other characters don't have enough to do, but I disagree. Instead of giving us the same old, James Gunn has taken his characters and put them in new and interesting situations that I think help in developing their characters more. And what he was able to do with Michael Rooker in this film is brilliant. Rewatching this, I couldn't help but be in tears in the final moments with an ending straight out of Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan. Oh, and let's not forget Kurt Russell as Ego, who may not be the best villain, but is a great character and helps in driving home the themes that Gunn wants to explore about fathers and sons. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 works in all areas, and that's why it's one of my favorites. And my number 1 favorite MCU film is Captain America: Civil War. Where do I begin? Civil War was the superhero film I had been waiting for ever since the MCU was created. And I didn't get it with Avengers, nor Avengers 2, but Civil War gave me just what I wanted. A film that, for all intensive purposes, is a Captain America film, but has all these other characters that don't normally belong in a Captain America story. It works as a huge crossover event for all the characters from all the movies. Avengers and Avengers 2 could be considered crossover events, but it's the Avengers. You expect all these characters to be together. Civil War, on the other hand, does this perfectly. Much like The Winter Soldier, the film continues with an element of spy and espionage, but feels closer to a Tom Cruise Mission Impossible movie. The story of the film is great and all, but where the film excels is what is going underneath, as Iron Man and Captain America begin to butt heads. The film also introduces to us Black Panther and Spider-Man, and makes of them standouts in the film, but they never steal the show away from Captain America. As for the villain, I find him incredibly underrated. Daniel Bruhl as Baron Zemo is cold, calculating, scary, and smart, as well as very sympathetic once you know his backstory. Daniel Bruhl plays him perfectly, and all these elements come together to create a perfect, fun movie experience. There's a reason why I saw this movie 4 times in the theater. It's a great film, and in my opinion, this is as good as the MCU movies can get. Well, guys, that was my list for you. Maybe you found some choices you agreed with, or maybe you don't agree with them at all, and that's fine. It's alright to have differing opinions on films. Film is so large and ultimately subjective that we're not going to agree on everything. But all that said, guys, I want to thank you all for watching this video, if you made it this far. This was actually a lot of fun to work on, and I'm happy that the list turned out the way it did. But I want to know what you guys think. Rank the MCU movies worst to best and post them at the bottom of this video. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next review.